everyone, to Legends of Dice, the show that is half informative and also half GM therapy for both of us. As always, I'm your host, Xeriana, and with our tech savvy co host, Kylar.
Yeah, tech savvy and with an 8-year-old laptop. I feel very savvy. I feel stuck in the dark ages. Save me.
But you make it continue to work, which is pretty savvy in my mind. Uh, Today we have lined up for you quite a bit, actually. As we started writing our notes, we realized we had a lot to say about character backstory, which is the theme of this week's episode. We were trying to kind of nail down what does a GM need to know from a character backstory, and what are the things that they need to look for and encourage their players to write in. But before we get into that, we of course have our news from the tableland, and we have quite a few stories today, but we'll try and get through them as quickly as possible. So, which one do you want to start with, since you did see them this time? So
I don't know. Why don't we
I'll
just go
let
in
you
the order in
choose.
which you posted them on the notes, and then I won't have to guess which one we're talking about next.
Okay,
And
that's
I
fine.
like the first one the best anyway, so if we have to skip the other two, it's fine. So we're good.
So yeah, our first one is actually, this is a video that I have recommended to all my players, and I think pretty much everyone in our group now has watched it. Probably at least a couple of times every time they make a new character. But if you are not familiar with how to be a great game master, their channel will put all, of course, as always, put links to all this stuff at the bottom in the description. But yeah, so he has this really great video where he basically takes you through all of the steps needed to create a great, fantastic backstory. And I like that. And throughout, he prefaces it like you can go as detailed as you want, but he starts it off with things that I don't think people typically think about. Usually when you start a campaign and you're a player for the first time, you think, oh, I want to be a mage who's a scholar and knows magic, or I want to be a barbarian from a tribe. But you don't often think about things like, who are your parents? Where were you born? What kind of education did you have? Did you have education? Those types of things that go into making a good character.
Yeah, and I like it because it's just, oh, here are 6 questions that you should ask, and then, but he goes through and walks you through. Okay, let's just imagine this one character we're creating, and that will let me see how those simple questions, which seem really basic, lead to more interesting questions. You can have options about thinking things, and also his voice is just great. So I like any video he does, pretty much, even if I disagree with it completely. Like, I can watch this video because you have a fun accent, and that's kind of how I roll. Um, but I think it is really good, especially for players who haven't done anything, or even players who are used to GMs who don't use backstories that often, and you're coming to a table where a GM is expecting a more fleshed out backstory, and you're like, I just
Mm-hmm.
created my character, and he has like 2 sentences, and then we go run through dungeons and fight stuff. It's
Right.
it's very easy to follow, and it's good advice. And sure, it's not the most in depth thing, but it's something quick that everyone can look at. And so you should definitely check it out. Again, check the description below. Great Game Masters, how to be a great Game Masters video on creating epic backstories, or epically boring, if you so desire. If all the answers to the 6 questions are boring, I'm not sure it'll be an epic backstory. It will be a complete backstory, but
I think
it'll
he
be
definitely
boring.
does a good. Yeah, I think he does a good job of maybe inspiring you to think a little bit longer than we were all in a tribe once,
We eat
and that
food.
was
We eat food. Ah.
fun. So moving on from that, the next story is not really anything to do with backstories, but it's a good one because it's from Gary Gygax, which, if you know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, you know Gary Gygax. And so this is a story from Crichton. He is the I guess you'd call him blogger of Raging Swan Press, which they're a great blog. You should subscribe to them, get their newsletters, because he has a lot of just like PDFs and stuff on dressings for dungeons and suggestions for how to flesh out a good story. But moving on from that, the thing he has in there is actually, like, I think it's 10 bullet points of advice for both GMs and players. And most of them are common sense, I would say, but I think it's a good thing to go through and remember, like, okay, yeah, Remember to be nice to other players. Remember to include your fellow players in the conversation. Remember not to hate your GM even if he kills your character. Yeah, no. Yeah, Kylar disagrees because I've nearly
Clearly,
killed him a couple times.
you be maniacal and spite your players and spite your GM at every opportunity, and that's his cohesion at the table. So you can take Gary Gygax's points and just throw them right in the garbage. No, I'm serious. Don't do that. I like this because it's just really succinct, and I like bullets that get to the point. And you can read this in approximately 3 minutes and be like, oh, yep, okay, I'm reminded of what I'm doing here. So if you're a GM that hasn't GM'd in a while, and you're like, okay, I just need something to get me back in the frame of mind. Go check it out because it'll take 5 seconds, and then you'll be like, oh, right, okay, I shouldn't be a complete jerk. Oh, okay, thank you, Gary Gygax, for pointing me in the right direction. You have saved me from looking like a complete fool.
Yes, and it's one of those things that, like, if you're a new player, great things to know, like first time. If you're an old timey, good things to be reminded of. And then for our final, see, we're getting right through the news because we've got a lot to talk about in our highlights, and then our characters, our main topic for today. But our final one is, again, it's not really about, it has nothing to do with backstories, but I like it because it shows that even people who professionally do this mess up sometimes. And so our last one is taking 20's video on the top, all the D&D adventure paths and in what order they rank. Now, I like lists like this that tell me avoid this thing, do this thing. So that really appealed to me because I think one of these days I'm going to get this group to run like an adventure path. I think that will be fun. But
It'll go
I liked
horribly
also
wrong. I don't know what you're talking about. We won't follow the adventure path. We'll start on the adventure path, and then the dragon will come and eat us like halfway through the campaign before we're supposed to, because we'll have made it mad somehow.
Yeah, remember that dragon you were supposed to kill? Oh no, no, we've forgotten.
No, we're going out. We're going
But
out. We're going over there to free the slaves. That was just a random detail that was added, but we decided to go free them instead. And now everybody's dead, and it's great.
it's great. But I like the thing is that he points out in the ones that don't work are actually weirdly enough things that don't work in any campaign. So like the last one at the bottom, I think it was the dragon one. I don't know. Watch the video. You'll figure it out. But the very first one he talks about, the real problem with it is pacing. The pacing's not good at the beginning. It's pretty boring, and then it gets exciting at the end. And I think that that's a good thing to point out because it shows that it's so whenever we talk about other GMs who are homebrewing, we're like, oh, your pacing sucks. Why didn't you? Well, we can see now from Wizards of the Coast, pacing is a hard thing to get right, and so you can be professionally writing adventure paths and still get it wrong. And so I think that that was a good thing that this video points out.
Yeah, it's like, oh, and I mean, it's always nice to hear from like an opinion of someone who has so much documented. This is what he does, and this is how he GMs. So you're like, okay, I know that you have this opinion of it, and I know you run this kind of game, so I know whether or not I'll agree with you on your rankings.
Mm-hmm.
If you agree or disagree, that's like, oh, I'm gonna read this random review online of this thing from this person I know nothing about, and like, this was the worst adventure I've ever run in my life. Nothing worked. I'm like, well, maybe you just GM in a very different style than, and your group wants something completely different. So it's not useful, but it's useful when you have taking 20's opinion because you know where he stands on pretty much every aspect of GMing and tabletop role playing in general because he has like a zillion videos about it. And well, I have never played any of the D&D adventure paths, nor will I probably ever unless Xeriana forces me to.
We will. We
Oh,
will do it.
I just like the creativity of knowing that the story was made by somebody at the table. It's more
Yeah,
interesting to me
that's
that way
true.
than it's like it was made by some guy who got it published over there, and he's like, "You shall do this, and you shall include this, and this is the next stage." Like, hello, yes, I am the GM. I am following the recipe book. I mean, it's not that obviously. There's a lot more involved than that, but I'm just saying in
You can
general.
add your own spices to it, make it your
But
own.
I just like having the GM's own vision for what the story is supposed to be on the table. And I also
True.
think that it's just a lot better for using character backstories, which is the focus of this. If you have your own story, because you can do whatever you want with it, and so you can base your story around your players rather than thrusting them into a pre-designed scenario where it might be harder to get all of their backstory into it. So that might be a case if you're running an adventure pack. you might just be like, you know what, backstories don't really matter that much. Just have like a general idea of your character, unless your GM is really ambitious and wants to modify the adventure significantly, which I'm sure our GMs would definitely do that because we like
We would
using.
totally.
Yeah, he's like, this, nope, this is garbage. I'm throwing this out. This doesn't make any sense. And we're bringing in your backstory because I want to murder the rest of the team. And this part of the backstory is really lethal. So that's totally, I didn't include it to help you out. I included it specifically to murder you. But then it's the
Specifically.
player's own fault for making their villains and their backstory so powerful.
Well, and tempting to use.
Yeah, see, but
But
that's the whole point is if you're writing it, this is a tip for players, not tip for GMs. If you're writing villains to your backstory, don't make them so scary you never actually want to fight them because your GM will make you
yeah,
fight them.
they will be the stuff of nightmares. Uh, oh, what was I gonna say? Oh, the only caveat I would say to that is if you're a first time GM, I would highly recommend an adventure path because and a good one. And again, watch this video to find which ones are good because if you found one with good pacing, it'll teach you along the way how to write stories. So if you're a first time GM, I highly recommend an adventure path unless you want to be super ambitious. I wish that I had done that. I did not. I homebrewed. I have homebrewed every campaign I've ever run, and many of them have crashed and burned.
What
I wish I
pacing
had.
problems in a home? What that didn't happen at the beginning of my camp. There was no pacing problem. They weren't stuck on Coruscant for 10 whole sessions. No, they
It
weren't
was
chasing one
long
guy for 3 sessions.
in one day. Like only 3 days
Come
after
on, you
I did all those
couldn't have just
sessions.
not tripped the silent alarm at his shop, and everything would have worked out so much faster. He would have been at his apartment. It would have been right there. But no.
That's that.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna blame the players on the pacing. Totally nothing to do with what I did whatsoever. There's just blame it on the players. That's what you got to do as a GM. Just blame the players behind their backs so they can't defend themselves.
And you just keep your lips sealed and just keep on going. All right, so moving on to our highlights. So we didn't have, because Thanksgiving, we all wanted to spend time with our families. So we didn't have a session Thursday. So we thought we instead, or Friday, because Thanksgiving was Thursday. But we thought instead we would give you just a few of our all time favorite highlights from the games we've run. So since I have been taking the lead in everything else, I'm turning it over to Kylar to start with his highlights or
Okay,
whatever highlight he
so
chooses.
I'm going in chronological order here. So my first highlight, um, this was the end of Xeriana's part of the Legends of the Force campaign. We were trying to thwart a Sith fleet, and we could have just sabotaged the ship, but some people, for some reason, wanted to just try and convince the admiral to stand down because Shiloh's a pacifist and whatever. But my character standpoint, he wanted to capture him alive to ask him questions about the Mandalorian War. Nobody else really knew this. So for me, the attempt to go in and actually confront the admiral, which could have gone terribly wrong, it only went semi wrong. Nobody died, so it was fine. Um, we escaped. It was fine. But for me, it was interesting to play the tactically sound person, like character, who was going in knowing this is dumb. This is a bad plan. We should just sabotage. Not even bother going up to the bridge level. This is terrible. If we get caught, we're totally screwed. But then having a reason to actually want to go up there and be like, I don't like this, but we're gonna attempt it. And it was entertaining. I got to point a bayonet at the back of the admiral's head, so that was fun. Um, and we made it out. So it was just really fun to play that because
That was.
I had totally different motivations than the rest of the group for wanting to go confront the admiral, and yet it was still
Mhm.
somehow just the plan, even though I thought it was actually a bad plan. My character just wanted to do it, and since everybody else wanted to do it anyway, he's like, you know what, fine. Everybody else is gonna make me do this stupid plan anyway. We're gonna go capture him. It's gonna be good. It didn't end up working out that way, but it was entertaining.
There was a lot of anxiety for me running that because I was doing it fully aware of everything that was going to come crashing down on you guys if you made a mistake. And I was like, I really hope this goes off well because I really don't want to bring the entire ship up to this room, which is what's going to happen. And there were Sith Lords prowling. There were some dangerous people up on that ship, but you guys managed really well to avoid all of the traps I had laid.
It was great because he triggered the alarm, but then we smashed the alarm thing, and then we managed to stealth. And then the people came in, and I had the gun pointed to his head, so he was just like, "Nope, everything's fine. The controls just got destroyed on accident." I don't know how the guards bought that, but I'm glad you let the guards buy it, because it let us get out of there without going through like massive amounts of enemies. So I was
Mm-hmm.
pleased.
I'm happy you were pleased.
Yeah. All right. So, what's your first highlight?
Well, I guess we'll stick with the same game. So this is about the middle of my campaign, and it's my favorite because it was a completely unexpected turn of events, but it actually turned into creating my favorite NPC that I've ever created. Minus one. There might be another one that I like better, but Kylar hasn't met her yet, so we'll we'll save that for next. But um so we in the middle of the campaign, the players realized that the spirits of that were haunting sort of this forest near the village that they were in were being tormented, basically, by an unknown entity, and that this torment was causing them anxiety because they couldn't really tell apart the living people. They didn't really know who was bad and who was good, so they just wanted it to stop. And so they went into this ancient temple to figure it out, and it turned out to be a Sith. And I had planned this whole mini boss battle. I didn't want it to be a big thing. I wanted it to be like their first encounter with real danger. And so I had this decked out stealth Sith Lord hiding up in the rafters. She was going to use force abilities to throw things at them that they weren't going to be able to find her for a while. And Aelin walks in and he rolls a natural 20 to perceive her, which I know some GMs are like, well, natural 20, they'll fudge it to make it so they don't completely succeed. I am not that way. In my mind, it's like, you roll a natural 20, you really should just succeed. I feel very strongly about that.
Except for me, when it's like a
But
persuade roll, that's like, should you be able to persuade this person? They're super
I
evil, so no. But
yeah, for those, I mean, it depends on the circumstances. But for this instance, I was like, well, I mean, it wasn't totally dark. It was very, very dark, but it wasn't completely dark. And so I was like, well, I mean, it's conceivable that he could have seen her. So then so he sees her, and I'm like, okay, well, he saw her. That's unfortunate, but I'm sure that she'll still be able to do. I mean, and then I'll just have her duck into another thing, and he'll lose cover. But the very next thing is that he gets to go first, and then he rolls a natural 20 to hit her, and in one shot takes down half her hit points. And then we also have a rule where if you roll for for critical hits and for critical failures, we have like a 1 or 2, like a 50-50 on something. And then she rolled a 1 on the 50-50. So she went tumbling down, and that took down another half her hit points. And basically then everyone just surrounded her, pummel, 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 and gone. And I was disappointed, to say the least. I was happy with both my players, happy for you guys. I was like, okay, that's great for you. But I was like, dang it, that's what's supposed to be this dangerous moment. But it produced one of the best, not only NPCs, but best moments, I think, in the game, because there became this moral quandary where half the party wanted to just outright murder her
well,
there
that's because
because they wouldn't.
Ajax almost got killed by an invisible force power from her. So
Yes,
she's like, she's dangerous. I'm just gonna shoot her, and then
yeah,
ends up getting hit by an electro staff weapon from his own players to stop him from killing her. And then I have to
Ajax
be
was.
operated on because I'm almost dead at that point. It's like, oh, thank you, players. I think, oh yes, this was great. You couldn't like move object, hold me. No, you have to hit me with a staff.
No,
No.
no, we don't. They're not gentle. Um, but and then they decided to save her life, and I decided, well, if they're going to save her, I need to flesh her out. She needs to be a more important character than I was going to make her. So I fleshed her out, and I made her fill in the holes that I was planning on filling in later, but just hadn't quite figured out how to do it. And uh, I'm now since very happy that that happened because, yeah, like I said, she's my favorite NPC, and it was a great moment to see to because it showed the players that they didn't always have to kill the NPC, that they didn't always have to kill everything in order to win the game, which I think is an important lesson, especially for new players to learn. And so I was grateful for it. later on. But in the initial battle, it was like, dang it, this was supposed to be epic, and that was sad.
I mean, her like creature that we fought before that battle was challenging,
It's true, but it
and
was
then
not. It was just
and then
supposed to
I almost
soften you
died.
up.
So I was okay with the quick ending of the battle. I was like, all right, great, all right, I'm not gonna just be useless in this fight. All right, great, because the fight's already over. Perfect. Don't have to do anything. This is great.
Yeah, but yeah, it was a good. It was it was a good lesson for I think both sides to learn.
Yeah. Are we still going with highlights, or are we gonna move on
I
to
think
the
so.
next thing? All right,
I
moving
think we
on.
can do one more of each.
Okay, well, this is a long highlight because it's complicated. This highlight has not endeared me to the rest of the players, but me and Kyra had a lot of fun setting it up. So this was faking Ajax's death at the beginning of Kyrath's campaign. Partially because I had come up with this concept for a character that was basically just a force seer and was kind of just using premonitions to try and figure out things and stop things from happening. And instead of like a full combat Jedi or Sith that we usually see, and I wanted to try and I was excited about that character because I had rolled up a backup. I made him as my backup character in case Adrak has died, and then I was like, what'd be really cool is if we played him, but I didn't want to just like have Ajak leave because I didn't really think that he would just leave the party because he didn't really have he had like two family members and that's pretty much it, and he didn't get any leads from the admiral, so there's not really a good reason for him to leave the group. So had this giant thing where basically Dell had seen a vision where he needed to fake his death so he could go on a secret mission away from the rest of the party to get something that they would need later, and this giant subterfuge thing. And it was great. And then everybody just tried to punch him in the face when they realized he was alive. Instead of being like, whoa, he's still alive, and then being mad at Dell. And they're like, no, how could you? Why? No, this is just. And I was like, okay, yep, thanks. All right, this is great. But it was fun in the planning stages, and then the execution of it was great because it just caught everybody by surprise. And
Mm-hmm.
then what was better was when people were arguing, it's like, he didn't have to do that. I'm like, you're right. And he didn't. Tactically, he could have just ran away and we would have been chased by a bunch of Sith, and that would have been a totally different encounter. But knowing what I knew, I was like, well, he did. So that's kind of how it worked out. So the players are like, that didn't make much sense. Why did he do that? Which is kind of what I wanted. To kind of create this sort of mistrust around Dell, which no one ever got over, which was disappointing. But it was fun to play. And just the execution of it was fun, even though everybody he probably dislikes me for it now. I enjoyed it. I think Hyrath enjoyed it. I'm not sure anybody else did.
I did. I enjoyed it. The thing I was most bummed about was that neither of my characters were attached to you in any way. So when it happened, like I think I was playing Lexa when it got revealed.
Yeah, but
Like
Lexa had
I
met him in the building in which the explosion happened the session beforehand. So well, I guess they met slightly before
we
that, but
met
they
the
knew each other
same
for
day.
like it was the same day. Yeah, right. So there was no impact there. The one who was most
So
closely tied with him was Alond, and he just like had a drink in his solitary style that he normally does. And then we found he was alive.
mhm.
He just got angry, and then it's like, yeah, that's fair. They kind of like had a pact to where he was gonna go help him find his yeah, like go hunt
His
down the people
girlfriend.
that killed his fiance and whatever. And at the end of your campaign, so then he kind of ditched on that. Uh, but
Oops.
but it was worth it. I think maybe I don't know.
I think it was what I think I think what it's funny because what you did kind of set the tone for the rest of the game because it brought to light all the problems, all of the mistrust everyone had for each other, and everyone could focus it on Dell. But then as soon as Dell left, then all the cracks have started to show, and people are starting to realize like what am I doing here? And I think we've talked about this as like it's unfortunate that our party is not more cohesive, but actually it could be an interesting story. Most of us played role play games with the idea of we're gonna be the Lord of the Rings crew, and we're all gonna love each other,
No,
and
we're
there's
like the
going to be
Suicide
this
Squad.
part.
We're the
Yeah,
good guy version of the Suicide Squad, whatever that is. I don't know if that. It's the
yes,
Justice League movies. We're those. We're them. We're not the Avengers. We're the Justice League. the new
but
Justice League. We all hate each other's
it's
guts.
just it's like why are you guys even together? We don't know. The movie made us.
The plot reasons we needed. We did. So we are. Ta-da!
But it is kind of an interesting question to ponder in like can you because there are people who will go through all these things and then just go their ways and not really want to have anything to do with each other. I mean, they saved the galaxy, but maybe they weren't so great when they were doing it. So I think it might actually turn out to, I'm being more positive about it than I initially was, because it might actually turn out to be an interesting question of like, sometimes you go through all of the things, you save the world, save the galaxy, and go through all this danger, but learn that you're different from the people. It changes you all to be different from each other, and you're cool with just saying goodbye. And
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how I've been running with it since the party has been so fractured. Trying to come up with a cohesive end that satisfies every single person in the party all at once is pretty much impossible. So as my campaign starts to wrap up, we're gonna start phasing out characters as they kind of go off to their happy ending or their maybe not so happy ending, um, because like you said, they have different goals. They're totally different people, so they were along for the ride. They did some things together, but in the end, they move on to something else. And
mm-hmm.
that's kind of the way I had to play it because I didn't see the group becoming one merry band of adventurers. Um,
No.
so that's going to be interesting. But yeah, that's an interesting point of it just like revealing the cracks. And then, yeah, everybody used Dell as the scapegoat for why nobody trusted each other, but it wasn't really true. And I knew that as Dell, it wasn't really true because I'm like, everybody trusts Dell, but Dell's the only one actually trying to accomplish the mission. Everybody else is just doing crazy stuff. I don't know what's happening anymore. Um, but
No one
yeah, I
does.
do think it set like a tone because it was just so like unexpected and crazy. It's like, whoa, and he's dead, and they clearly planned this because like that just kind of threw people because like our characters felt pretty
Mm-hmm.
invincible before that. So even though we had to introduce like a death as artificially instead of just like the way the dice roll, I think it's more meaningful to do it in a way that's planned out than just be like, oh look, and this character died, and it was during this
Yeah.
fight, and it was for a reason, and Ajax didn't end up being dead. But even if he had, I think it would have been a more interesting story point than just this person happened to run out of hit points during this one fight. And I'd prefer my characters go out in a something doing something meaningful that you plan with the GM. You're like, I'm sick like, and that would be, this is totally separate, but like if you want your character to die or go away, don't just like try and sabotage them in a fight.
Mm-mm.
Your GM will work with you to have them have a more meaningful reason for dying so that it's better for the story instead of just like, oh, they died.
Yeah,
It's
well,
more fun for the
it's
rest
more
of the
fun.
group.
Yeah, and I think if you try to force it, it's obvious, and that frustrates everyone because they're like, why are you like, why are you trying to do this when a GM, like, we want you to have fun, and if you're not having fun with the character you're playing, tell us. We will find a way to either maybe there's a way to improve your character you didn't see, or we can introduce a new character, but find a meaningful way to do it instead of just, oh, I don't heal myself even though I've got 20 potions. What's your I just don't think it's worth it. Oh
I
no,
got
I
distracted.
messed
I
up.
forgot I had them in my pocket this
Oh,
whole time. Oh no, I died. What? How did that happen?
oh no.
Yeah,
Puffin,
yeah.
you should watch Puffing Forest's video. He's got a good video about that specifically.
I'm gonna try and find it. And I'll put that in the link because I know exactly what you're talking about. And yes, it is
Mhm.
hilarious.
All right,
But
so
yeah, your highlight. Moving on.
mine, the final one. Mine's pretty quick, but I like it because it was a great just character, like just character growth. You don't actually. There's not a lot of times where I can just instantly see character growth, but I did in this instance. So this is for my fantasy campaign, the Forerunners campaign. Um, the party was in the middle of their hunt. They've been hunting scorpions for about 3 days at this point, and in the process, a sandstorm quickly came upon them and they were kind of scrambling for what to do. And it was interesting because I had thought, in my head, I was thinking, okay, this will confuse some of them, but there's plenty of them that are going to be like, all right, this is what we got to do. Let's go, let's go. But it didn't. Actually, it was surprising. Nearly everyone was just like, what do we do? Everyone was scrambling, running. I think Harmony and Ari were the first two who were like, well, let's tie rope around each other, and like they were trying to do stuff. but for the most part, everyone was kind of just
I was
confused.
also madly googling viable actual options because I didn't want to suggest something like that sounds like it would work, and it's like, nope, nope, that would just really kill you because I wanted to make sure that there wasn't like, actually, that's just a terrible idea. So I was like, we should tie ourselves together. Scramble Google, quick surviving sandstorm. Like, all right, uh, what? Yeah, and yeah. So that's what I was busy doing.
I could feel that. I could feel people doing that. I was like, they're gonna do it. But I can always rely on John as a player because he made a decision as Olaf to basically take the lead. And like without he didn't even like really participate in the group discussion about what to do. He just said, "All right, I move my character this and tell everyone to follow me." And he just took leadership and led them up to like I think he to a higher hill and where a bit of a slope where they could get some cover, and then I think you guys made like little tents and stuff and managed to hide underneath that. He had and then he took a shield out and he used it to basically shield himself as he pushed through. And it was a great character moment because he'd been playing this character as kind of the guy that just kind of went along. I mean, he was with his brother and he wasn't looking for danger, and he had taken some leadership in some layers, but he hadn't really like just decided to be the leader. And I think in that moment he just decided, I know what to do, everyone else is panicking, I'm just going to do it, and they'll follow. And you guys did, and it was great, especially as a GM, to just see that and be like, wow, that's a great decision, and it changes who your character is. It leads him towards a better path in a way that you don't that's not what a real person would do. It would be a real kind of character moment for a real person. So it may not be a highlight in other people's. It probably was just like a moment that happened. It was like, oh, we survived the sandstorm. But as a GM, that was a pretty cool thing to watch.
Well, I mean, for the scrambles that happened at the beginning, because then it ended up turning out okay. Because then we like made like wet rags to like cover our mouths and some
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So like, and then yeah, then John took us over to, and then we had rope together so none of us would get lost. And it ended up being like we planned it pretty well for like the initial panic. From the initial chaos came a decent plan that ended up working out. So I don't know, that worked out pretty well for me because when it first happened, I was like, oh no, no, this is gonna go poorly. We don't plan well. This isn't gonna happen. We're all gonna die. I'm gonna get like someone's gonna get hit by a giant boulder or something. This is gonna go really terribly. But it didn't. So kind
Well,
of.
and that
Yeah.
sandstorm was a random encounter because I rolled because we or one of you rolled for that, and that was on my random encounters list, and I was like, okay, here we go. So
I
yeah,
fly so high that the sandstorm is below me. That's what I do.
that's nearly you would be in space.
No, the sandstorms aren't that high. I think I could reach a high enough altitude where I could maybe kind of breathe and not
You're
freeze
not
to death
accounting for the
totally.
fact this isn't a fantasy world. You
Going
have
with
no idea how high that was.
I'm going with weather atmospheric conditions are very similar to Earth's because humans live there. And so the weather patterns would be like if it's just a regular sandstorm, not a magic sandstorm, would still obey the laws of weather that I know because I took an Earth and atmosphere class, and so it would top out and you'd end up with like there'd be space above, but it would probably be so cold that you'd freeze to death. So probably not a good move unless you have like an airplane. I mean, it's a good move. If you have an airplane, go above the storm. It's much safer.
I can neither confirm nor deny whether there was magic involved, so we will never know. I mean, it was.
I think your
I mean,
random
you
roll
guys.
table needs some more details.
It's
So,
got details.
well,
It's
then you
got details.
could
Okay.
confirm or deny that it has magic involved.
I just chose not to. I'm choosing not to.
I'm
That's the
choosing
thing.
whether some crazy evil thing following us because there was those crazy portals that opened up and let the wraith monster through. So I'm just
I
going with
love
everything is magically evil and everything has to die. That's just my conclusions. If I see
I
something as
love the
magic, it
fact
must be evil.
I love the fact that you guys fixate on that. It delights me so much. Like, what is going on? And I'm just like,
Well, my problem was it looked like rifts, so my character, like, if it was, my character would have been very, very, very concerned instead of moderately concerned. But having random portals open up and a monster coming out still very concerning after just dealing with a rift. A little on edge. Be like, oh no, more things are coming through portals. This isn't good. It's not like, oh, it's just another day in the desert. Things are dropping through portals. This is normal. That's not how. That's nope. It's
no,
probably it might be normal, but he doesn't know that.
no, he won't know that.
Nope. He'll never
Not
know that.
yet.
He'll just see it and he'll be like, oh, it's another one of those portals. Well, Shadow Soul must be ready to break free of his prison. All right, we're good. All right, let's go
World
time.
is
Let's do
ending.
this. Let's do it. Roll initiative. We're fighting them. It's gonna happen. Bring the flaming catapults.
I would not recommend that at level 4. It will not end well for you
No, we
all.
recruit all the powerful people that know how to use the catapults. I just tell them to get the catapults, and then I leave. I'm like, okay, it's go time, and then I'll just be like, look, there he is. I found him. Go fight him. People who are clearly more powerful than us. Yeah, entire armies. Yes, you go, and then we'll go back home, close our own rift. Good luck with that. Yes,
Have fun.
leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And if your continent gets taken over, we're just gonna put up a giant barrier of magic on our continent, so you guys can have fun over there. We'll be safe because we'll totally be powerful enough to make that kind of barrier. Flawless plan.
That sounds like a Harmony plan, to be honest. Hey, Curiosity, do you know magic stuff? Do this. And Curiosity's like, okay.
Hey, every time he's done it, it's worked out, so it's fine.
I just know Kylar. I know Kyrath enough to be. He's just gonna be like, look at me and be like, can I do that? No, I didn't think so.
I'll just call up the rest of the Daymat, and then they'll be like, oh, yeah, we can totally raise a giant barrier, because we have a barrier protecting this. Oh, wait, no, never mind. We're lame, and we had let them through that barrier, so we're clearly not that good at making barriers. And then it's not a good plan.
Mm-mm.
It's more like a
But
last-ditch surviving plan. Anyway,
we
moving
should
on.
probably move to our main topic.
Yes, we should. Main
All
topic
right.
time.
Yes.
We're digging
So
in, much like hooks dig into skin, because we're talking about character hooks. And that was the best segue ever.
that was really grim.
Well, it's like fishing. You know, it's a fishing hook. It's not like into the players. It's a fishing hook.
You said flesh. That's not. I would have said scales if I'd meant
No,
fish.
but the inside of the mouth of the fish doesn't have scales.
Okay. We don't need to delve into the metaphor. We got to get back on topic. That's not helpful either. Now I feel like I gotta shout to get to you, even though that's stupid.
That's not how it works. You're right
No.
here.
Okay. He's distracting me. Moving on. Main characters. So yes, we're talking about character hooks and backstories. We're not really talking about like how to make a backstory because your players should know how to do that, but really how do you set up a story with putting in the backstories, because you don't want to do what is known as railroading, which is where you make basically a story and then you just tell your players this is the road you have to go and there is no deviations and there is no looking off the side quest. We do this, and we do this, and then it ends and story done. That's bad. Instead, you want to try and leave it somewhat open-ended, but also including in the important aspects of people's backstories. The way that I have thought about it when I've ever created a story is that, now I know I said railroading is bad, so this is going to be a weird metaphor,
You're building on
but
top. It's not just a railroad. It's a special railroad.
it's a very special railroad. But the way I see it is that you can still build a railroad. You just make different tracks that you can go on. And what the flavor that you add to the railroad is the cars you put on it. So when you're building your railroad, you know exactly. Start with, you need to build your tracks. You got to put them somewhere. And this is where I would say world building. We'll not delve into that. That's a different episode. Totally different episode. But let's just say you have this world and you've built it. So that would be your mountains and your dunes and all the things that you know you're going to have to get around in order to build this railroad, to get this road going in a direction. So there you go. But how do you the railroad tracks that you put down are things that, like, okay, I want to have a villain whose main goal is to be king of the werewolves. So that I know I'm going to have king of the werewolves in my campaign. That's going to come up. But you don't necessarily have to then just say, okay, so this is how they're going to encounter them, blah, 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 blah. Instead, what you would do is you'd look through your characters' backstories and you'd say, is there anyone who does the first thing to look for, does anyone have werewolves in their backstory, like, at all? If they don't, then you look for maybe they have parents that have disappeared. Maybe they have weird things that have occurred near their village that they've never been able to figure out. Maybe one of the players has a pet wolf that's always been around them their whole life, and they just don't know why. But you look up for those different things, and then you start laying down your tracks. So it's still the story you're going to tell, but you want to put in as many of the characters' backstories as you can. And sometimes too, sometimes you can like make your villain up and like they have nothing to do with the character's backstory because you have this villain and you want to do it. But you make their minions a part of it or something to that effect. So that would be so and then so that's like your railroad. That's what you put together. When you then put the players on the car tracks, that's when you start like basically you know kind of almost like this is going to sound sort of like the Sims, but you put the railroad there and then you decorate the interior with side quests and uh little references to character backstory, but each of the cars is like a character. And this probably sounds very confusing, but when you get those cars set up there, then you can take them down the different tracks you have, put there. And in the end, it's still going to go in the direction that you still going to go in the direction that you planned out from the beginning, but along you've taken different routes to get there. And I think that that's probably the most important part of the backstory is that you should allow the players to determine how do we get to the end. I think for a GM, you decide the beginning, decide the end. The middle part should be mostly your players' thoughts and their things.
Yeah, or reactions to what the players have done. Um, yeah, so it's more like having it's like your campaign flavored with the players' stories. So
Mm-hmm.
don't create before you have your back. Don't before you have all your characters' backstories. Don't be like, I'm going to create every single villain in every single village and everything, and I will not change it.
Mm-mm.
That's not good. You should be like, okay, here's my villain, and here's what they're trying to do, and what can I pull in from the people's backstories that makes sense. Um, an ancillary thing to this is that it's very tempting to just, have your main story. Be like, we're doing the main story, but then you're like, oh, I'll recognize people's backstories by having side quests. So the dangers of side quests is my first point. So if it's ancillary to the overarching story, um, well, it's simpler for the GM because the GM's like, well, I already know what's going to happen, or I already have everything planned. I can just, oh, the person's like long lost sister just happens to be in this town, but it's not really connected to anything, and they're just there, and so some hijinks could happen with like them getting kidnapped, but it doesn't move the story in any meaningful way. It's just kind of like, oh, it's okay, I guess it's there, and it's a side quest. We got to go rescue his sister now, and then the rest of the players who don't care about the sister is just like, why is this here? There's a giant dragon that's about to eat everybody. Can we go deal with the dragon? Sorry about your sister, but that's not really important. We're on a time crunch here. Time out. Let's prioritize one sister, entire villages. One sister, entire villages. One sister. So the character whose sister is, maybe like, I gotta go save my sister, and then everyone else is like, no, we will go fight the dragon. And so if you treat them just as side plots, then and the main plot is time sensitive, then everyone might just ignore the side quests that you have put together based on people's backstories. So, especially for the
Or
players who it has nothing to do with.
or worse, it'll drive that one character to be like, well, I guess you're gonna go save the world, but I'm not leaving my sister to die. And so then that player has to now make a new character because basically their character had to walk off to save their sister, which would be a reasonable thing to assume.
Yeah, but see, it's really easy to take the kidnapping sister thing. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later because kidnapping is super cliche, but there are times for it. But instead of just having them be there and then get kidnapped by somebody, how about instead having the main villain being annoyed by the players who keep thwarting him, so then to try to dissuade the players from pursuing him any further, kidnaps relatives or people that are from the characters' backstories, which can get dicey because then you end up killing people from people's backstories and they might get mad at you. But this is
You
my
should
exam.
still do it.
This is my example for. Well, you can talk to Kyrath about that one. But so that's a way you can take the backstory and take kind of like this and turn it into something that's actually related to the main quest, while still kind of being like not the super main thing that we were trying to do, but it's like a reaction of the villains to the players is they're going after
Mm-hmm.
family members now. And so then that way you can use parts of their backstory without having to just be like, oh, and they got kidnapped by pirates. Wow, how did that happen? Look, your your family is in this story. Look, isn't this so immersive? And then they'll actually get to it because they'll be like, well, we still want to pursue this guy, but we can't because he has our family members. So now we got to go save our family members so we can continue to go fight the dragon because the dragon is into kidnapping people now, I guess. This is what happens when I
Well,
come up with things on the fly. But my point is, make them important. Make the hooks that you decide to use important enough that
mhm.
everybody in the party is willing to go along with it, not just the one person whose hook it belongs to.
Well, to go to your point, if so, let's say you don't want the dragon to be kidnapping the sister, but maybe the gang that kidnaps her actually has also an artifact or information that would help you kill the dragon. So now everyone else also has a goal to go over there too. So you can find ways to include people as a major plot point. A great example of this actually is in Critical Role. I'll bring this up a lot because Critical Role is like the standard, I think, for role playing. But so one of the characters has a whole story where his homeland was taken from him. Some nobles came in, killed his entire family. He barely escaped. His sister escaped with him, but she was shot on the way out, and he had to leave her behind. And so when the party finds him, he's in jail because he's basically been trying to murder the people who killed his family. That's illegal. So he was in jail. And the GM didn't touch this at all for a long time until about like a kind of a lull in the game where there really wasn't that great a villain. He then made it into a major point. And at that time, all the players they really cared about this character, and they were like, oh yeah, they killed your entire family. We'll go with them. And so it became this huge quest line where it actually turned out that that the people who killed his family were basically building a necromancer dungeon and had been using his family and the people that they killed to bring this orb, which turned out to be the thing that brought the main villain at the very end of the campaign into the world. But they didn't know that at the time. They didn't even know that for a long time because the next thing after that quest was the dragon thing. So it was a long time for that to pay off, which I can only imagine as GM, like sitting on that for a while. But in the short term, what it provided them was a home base. Because after they cleared it all up, well, he's the noble. He and his sister. It turned out the sister that got shot, she actually survived. So it's just him and his sister. Well, they're the rulers of this basically city state, and so the players had basically a whole home base where they could invest their time in, build things in, and so it paid off for the entire party. But it was basically it seemed like at the beginning like just a side quest for the main character, for one of the characters, but it turned out to be a very important part of the larger story that was going on throughout the whole campaign.
Yes, and that, if you're watching Legends, you'll have to wait for because Kyrath did some things that he was planning on just being side quests. And what I decided to do was like, you know what? I'm going to turn the side quest that nobody thought was actually important into the main quest. So I'm really looking forward to the payoff. And I was like, oh, that's what he's doing. I hope people actually realize what I've been doing this whole time because it's just been so much like moving behind the scenes that it's just kind of I get the sitting on something waiting for the payoff. Hopefully people like the payoff. People might hate the payoff and be like, what have you done to the campaign? You have ruined it. Um, but that was just my unique scenario of having the opportunity to take side quests that other GMs had that we never got to because they were side quests and our main mission was time sensitive. And so we kind of just were like, oh, Elon's fiance may or may not still be alive, but there's also someone who looks like her who tried to kill him, but side quest. And it's like, oh, but it's coming back because now we have
Mm-hmm.
time to deal with it because now we killed the giant shadow monster thing. Anyway, wow, we have got to roll through our stuff if we want to get through everything we want to talk about. We may end up doing a Hooks episode part 2 sometime down the line because we have so much to get to.
True. But I think so. Then moving on, maybe to like my last point, because this is a very important point too that I think can. So we just talked about how like it's super important you pull things from your players, and like you need to pull things and bring them into the forefront. But now I'm going to say something that sounds counter, and it's going to be don't pull everything. You and it sounds really anti. Like why would you ever do this? But you kind of need to pick who the main characters are of your players. That sounds really bad because it sounds like you're saying some of your players are not as important as the others. That's not true. some of their characters are not as important as other characters. And this comes down to, I mean, it can come down to a lot of things. Maybe your campaign fits better with some other backstories. Maybe some people are better at writing more interesting backstories. And so you're spending more time there, where it's like, ooh, you kind of wrote me like 5 lines. I can't really do much with that. Sorry. So, sometimes you can look at something and be like, I'm not going to touch this. Or if I do, it'll be a small thing. And then other characters, you're like, man, this is the meat of this character's backstory is basically the same as my main story. So we're going to use that a lot. And I think the best thing advice I can give to a new GM is like like if you're running a game of more than 4 people, like if you got 4 people, you can probably make them all into main characters. You have more than 4, like pick 3 or 4 characters and decide these are my main characters. These are, I hate to use the term side characters, but they're supportive characters in the cast. They are there to help to make interesting side quests for when you need them. They're there to kind of help the other players, with the more interesting stories go along. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time for this reason or that. And, if you feel bad about that, the way I say it is like, well, you can always make it up to them in the next campaign. So you can be like, okay, well, next campaign, I'm going to pick these person's characters and I'll make them the main character. But I don't overwhelm yourself by thinking you've got to include every aspect of every person's backstories.
Yeah, and a side note to that is, say uh, you're stuck between choosing a character that gives you someone who gives you a giant backstory and someone who doesn't give you very much at all. You got to make sure that your players know that you intend to use backstories before you start using backstories. One, so that they don't get mad at you when you like pull up something from their backstory. You're like, I didn't want you to do that at all. Another thing is to make sure you're on the same page as the character, so you don't pull up something and then end up having contradict something that they actually meant in their backstory, and you'd misread something, because that is a whole nother problem. Happens sometimes, but you try and not have it happen. I won't get into that, but it has happened to me, and it was slightly disappointing. Um, but more than that is, if someone's coming from somewhere where the GM didn't really use that much of people's backstories, and you're coming together as a new group and they don't know how you GM, and they're just like, well, we just kind of create generic, like, I know a couple things about my character and what they're like, and so I can interact in this dungeon crawl that we normally do, and then they show up to a table and everybody else has these really detailed backstories, they could feel left out. So, do they write a short backstory because they don't really care that much about the backstory and delving into their character, and they don't really need you to include things from their backstory? Or did they just not know that you use a backstory, and so they just never made one because it was never useful to them in the past? So to create characters are just like general concepts and name and class, and boom, we're done. And so to have that, so that you actually have things to work with, and so the players know where you're coming from, do that. And if someone isn't that good at writing backstories but still would like to have a lot of character development, but you don't have a lot of details and you don't have the time to work with them on a more detailed backstory, you could introduce plots that kind of appeal to a character's flaws. So you give them
Yeah.
chances for growth, something to confront, something, okay, they know their character is like, they're very pacifist, they don't like killing people. So present scenarios in which that kind of view of themselves in an adventure game, which is a whole other layer in of itself, but having them actually confront it. So if they're willing to try and have character growth, then you can have not a very detailed backstory, but still have moments for the character, so that the player feels like their character matters and what they're doing is actually interesting to them. And so that's how you can use, if a player gives you like 5 lines and then tells you a little bit about their character's personality, you'd be like, hey, so what's your character's flaws, and like
Right.
what kind of things would make an interesting story if I wanted to include scenarios that your character would react either very positively to or very negatively to, or have it challenge and kind of butt heads with things. How does that work? So then you can have someone who hasn't written you a backstory still feel involved at the table.
No, I would totally agree with that. And just because, I don't want anyone to think that because I said like don't not everyone's going to be your main character, that means you ignore them. Absolutely not. Every one of your players should have a moment. They should have a moment where they shunned you. You didn't write me enough. Go away. Yeah. No, every single one of them should have a moment where their character is brought to the forefront. but it's about them for that part. It's just that maybe the main plot will fit and flow better in some people's stories. Like it'll be more prophetic, more like this is tied more into me. Because let's be honest, a barbarian who's from a tribe, someone could write that very interesting. That's great. That may not fit into every campaign. It may not be that interesting to go into. But you should still have that moment where that barbarian can do something for his tribe or fights against his tribe or whatever his thing is. He should still have his moment, even if his backstory is basic, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, some characters might want to have a simple backstory. Like, there's nothing really, my character is not that interesting, and I want them to develop along the way, and that's kind of the point of the character. Well, then you're not going to have that much in terms of hooks to bring in that are specific, but then again, you use those character flaws and you present it in interesting ways, and then their character still feels like they matter.
Yeah, no. And it doesn't even have to be flaws. I mean, maybe you're running a campaign where you got one person in the party who's a dragonborn, and your whole campaign you really haven't encountered dragonborn at all. And then you decide, oh, well, this person really hasn't had a moment yet. So you decide to just throw them into a dragonborn village. Well, now all of a sudden that character is more important than everyone else because he's the only one like those people in the village. Maybe that village is racist and they're like, they don't talk to anyone but that one character. So then that character is forced to the front. They have to interact. They have to be kind of the star of the show. Even if it's for a couple of sessions, everyone should have that moment where their character that they've developed, whether it's a hook that you've used from the backstory or something that they're reacting to that you put in. I think what I try to do is I try to have at least one moment per character in an act. Now, some people, as I've said, are going to have more than that because their backstory is more interesting or this is going to tie in. Or sometimes you can just not plan things and it's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, the things he's going through would relate to that. But if you aim for at least one major quest or revelation within each act of your story for each character, I think you'll do a better job of making everyone feel included. And that's really the point of using a backstory is that if you want to split the GMing is 75%, or a role play game is 75% on the GM for the story, and then the other 30% is the players, you still don't want to make them feel like that 30% was just spent 3 hours on that and you're like, that's great. Yeah, I'm not really gonna touch any of that. Moving on.
No.
That's bad.
And I think I'm going to get to my last point here because it fits so well with your picking and choosing main characters that I have enough time. We got like a little bit of time left to fit into an hour. We can do this. Is only use hooks that fit the story, right? So don't shoehorn in the nemesis of a character if you can't explain why they're there or what they're doing. Be like, he works for the guy, didn't you know? Yeah, he totally, even though he probably would be a loner and didn't really, live on this in this region, but he's here for some reason because I wanted to give your character's backstory some weight. And you're like, this just feels. Don't break immersion just to include elements from somebody's backstory. It has to make sense within the story. And so then that'll help if you can figure out ways to use the backstory in the story. Then that'll kind of make who's the main characters and who's more the support characters if you're dealing with a very large group more apparent than just kind of like picking and choosing on it, like, oh, this person's backstory is really detailed. Well, you should make sure you can use all of it. So use hooks that fit the story. If nobody's hooks fit any of the story that you're doing, you should probably do a different story because the group isn't going to work with the story that you have, because if nobody's lines up with it, nobody's character will fit with your campaign whatsoever, and then you either make them make new characters or you make a new story, maybe both.
Well, and yeah, to go with that, Cody from Taking 20 says this over and over and over. Set the expectation. Start your game by telling them this is what you're going to do. I mean, when I started Fantasy Age, I told you guys right off the bat, we're going to have a desert campaign. We're going to spend a lot of time there, and that we're gonna do a full length campaign. So I need backstories. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that, and that set the expectation. Now I didn't lay out my story for you all. You don't know what I'm going to do, but you had an expectation of, okay, so we're going to start in a village. We need to figure out how we got to this village. We're going to be guarding a caravan. We need to figure out what we need to write our characters with those things in mind. Why are we here? Why are these things that way? And the other thing too is, actually Barry's done a really good job with this, which plug in. I meant to try and get this plugged in on Tuesday. We'll be starting a whole new campaign in the World of Warcraft universe, so that'll be exciting. But Barry's done a good job in what he asked Kyrath and I very early on. What type of story do you want? Now, fortunately, Kyrath and I are very similar in a lot of the way we tell story and like things, and so we were pretty much easily able to say, well, we want a story that involves investigation and exploration. That's what we like. That's what we want. And so he's now able to plan out, and we'll see how he goes about that. But he can plan out, okay, so they want intrigue. Probably, I think you would agree with this, probably out of all the people in the group, Kyrath and I like politics the most, and we'll spend a lot of time arguing and debating and trying to figure out, the political situation, while everyone else is like, can we just go fight things now? We're done with this
I mean, I've just
conversation.
made characters that just are not that way. I enjoy it, but then I make characters that I think interact in a funny way. It's like, no, my characters is like, this is stupid. This is the obvious solution. Stop being dumb. We're gonna go do this thing.